Worldly people following these quotes keep waiting for a day when they will become rich and their family relations would become joyful. They keep putting all their efforts to set their life right on their own. I did the same for a long time. Now I want to know what exactly happens if we do not pray to God and surrender to God's will. If you say that every quality directed towards God becomes a good quality, and that uh, when directed towards the world it becomes bad, here I want to clearly understand why going towards the world is bad. What is the exact consequence when we desire worldly things instead of God? I am understanding that God is good and feeling that the world is not bad. I want to know the greatness of God compared to this world. I want to understand the value of God for whom great devotees gave up all their worldly bonds. Kindly enlighten me at your divine lotus feet, Trailokya. If a person follows the above concept of self-confidence, Swami replied, if a person follows the above concept of self-confidence, dreaming that one day he would lift up a hill with his hands, will he succeed in that effort even if he concentrates on the idea for his entire life? This approach to boost self-confidence is only applicable to people who suffer from mental issues and have very low self-confidence. The mental patient who has lost self-confidence thinks that he cannot even lift a very small gravel stone. Such a mental patient should follow this theory of boosting self-confidence in order to succeed in lifting up a stone having the weight that is within the capacity of the person. This approach only helps such a person who has lost the normal level of confidence. It will not help in increasing the capacity of a person having the normal level of self-confidence already. The police will get you back your lost money, but they cannot help you gain more money than you had. This concept has a certain limited boundary, and that boundary is the maximum natural capacity of a person. Krishna lifted the Govardhana hill even without this approach. He did not do any such mental exercises before lifting the hill. This advice must be given only to mental patients who live with very low self-confidence. A normal person always has the required quantity of confidence, and he also knows the limits of his or her own capacity. For such normal people, this advice is useless. You can use the word faith in the case of the mental patient because the patient does not have the faith in his or her own mental capacity, in his or her own capacity. The word faith will help such people in regaining the knowledge of their own capacity, but it cannot improve their capacity beyond its normal and natural level. Even in the spiritual path, the word faith is illogical and meaningless. If a beggar comes to you and goes on saying that he has faith in you that you will donate money to him, will you donate anything to him? If you donate to him based on his words, you are mad since you have been brainwashed by him. God is not such a mad person, and no soul can brainwash God. Faith cannot yield any result from anybody, including God. It is love or devotion involving self-sacrifice that brings the result from anybody, including God. The response for your theoretical love will come from the other side when your theoretical love is proved in practice in the form of service or sacrifice. This practical service and sacrifice can be called practical love. The entire theory presented in the book referred by you, including the concept of faith, is only applicable to psychological patients whose self-confidence is lower than normal. It is not applicable to normal people who have the normal level of confidence and are well aware of their normal capacities. The next question, again by Kumari Trailokya. Do good times hinder the progress of beginners on the spiritual path? So she describes it in detail. We have learned from you that God has arranged joy and misery alternately in our lives so that we can get maximum entertainment from life. Astrology gives us the correct time periods when we will enjoy health, wealth, and prosperity. as well as when we will face many worldly problems in life. You have also said that Shani, who is the giver of difficulties as per astrology, is also the Jnanakaraka, or the giver of knowledge. This means that we will receive divine spiritual knowledge during the bad times when we face worldly difficulties. For spiritual beginners who are still attracted to the world and not completely attracted to God, do astrological good times hinder their spiritual progress by taking them away from God? At your divine lotus feet, Trailokya. Swami replied, you are bringing various concepts together that are to be applied in different cases with rocket speed and making them collide. Unless you understand each concept with a slow and steady speed in its specific context, consisting of the situation and the stage of progress, it will only lead to confusion. These concepts mentioned by you apply to different levels of people or to the same person at different levels of spiritual progress. Different people who are at different levels may come together at the same time. But the different levels of spiritual progress cannot come together in a single person at the same time. A yogi tries to get entertained by creation like God, enjoying the tragedies and comedies one after the other, but not at the same time. A person before attaining this state of yoga is under ignorance and wants to get continuous happiness without doing any meritorious deeds. He also wants to avoid misery in spite of continuously committing sins. This ignorant person wants to enjoy the movie with both comic and tragic scenes and enjoy meals consisting of both sweet and hot dishes. Your stage and your view towards life is important. A concept is valid for a person with a specific view towards life. If you are worldly, consult an astrologer. But if you are spiritual, consult the Sadguru or the divine preacher. Sometimes the astrologer may also be a divine preacher, and the divine preacher may also be an astrologer. Even in this case, he will act as per the stage and viewpoint of the person approaching him. Shirdi Sai Baba was both an Ayurvedic doctor as well as a divine preacher. As per the viewpoint and stage of the persons approaching him, he would act as a doctor or a divine preacher. He would also act as the ultimate God, as the human incarnation of God, before some devotees. All these three aspects cannot be mixed in Baba at the same time for the sake of a single person approaching him. The same Baba can play all these three roles at different times towards the same person as the person attains different stages of spiritual progress.
Yeah.
He can even play he can even play multiple roles at the same time while dealing with three different persons. He may cure the illness of a normal worldly person by giving certain Ayurvedic medicines. He may preach to a person who is anxious to know the worldly knowledge of justice and injustice. He may also preach spiritual knowledge about God to a spiritual seeker. Finally, he may act as God, the human incarnation, to a devotee who is at the climax of theoretical and practical devotion. The next question, again by Kumari Trailokya. Is it possible to follow justice without fail eternally without any divine guidance? A detailed question is, Swami, I am extremely blessed to be under your divine guidance and I am learning to vote for justice against injustice. Suppose there is a soul who does not follow a Sadguru, the human incarnation of God, or even a Guru who is a scholar of the scriptures. Can that soul vote for justice against injustice? Is it possible to follow justice without fail eternally without any divine guidance? At your divine lotus feet, Trailokya. Swami replied, if you are able to follow justice and avoid injustice without the guidance of a divine preacher, it means that you are born with past knowledge. It means that you had obtained the guidance of a divine person in your previous birth. Hence, the guidance of a divine preacher is inevitable. Even if you are following justice without the help of any divine preacher, you will certainly require his help whenever you face a doubt in your journey. The divine preacher is actually the human incarnation of God. Is there anything that is possible without the guidance of God? A guru who is a mere scholar of the scriptures may also go wrong in certain critical points of knowledge. It is the highest fortune of a soul to come in contact with a Sadguru or human incarnation of God. If the soul wastes that privileged opportunity, that soul is the most unfortunate in this entire creation. One may get human birth again, but one will not get the contact of a Sadguru for a second time. This is the importance of the Sadguru, which is praised by Shankara. He said that if one does not attain the Sadguru, what is the use of attaining everything else? Tatakkim, 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 tatakkim. What is the prerequisite? The next question is by Shri Surya. He's asking, what is the prerequisite? Yeah.
Sir, can I share the video now? If some technical reason was there before, it failed.
I'll just complete this. Maybe around 9 o'clock we can share. Is that okay, Swamiji?
Okay.
Okay.
This question is by Surya ji. What is the prerequisite for a devotee to constantly remain in Lord Datta's service forever? His detailed question is, Pada Namaskaram Swami, how can a devotee be in the constant service of God for all future births? Is there any prerequisite from the side of the devotee for Lord Datta to grant him such an opportunity? At your lotus feet, Surya. Swami replied, the prerequisite for such continuous service to God Datta, is the service done by the devotee in the present birth. In the selection for a job, both academic qualifications and work experience are prerequisites. Between these two prerequisites, work experience is given the topmost importance because it proves that the candidate is already fully capable of applying his academic knowledge to the job. Of course, without academic knowledge, one will not even be selected for the very first job. A devotee who has practiced Karma Yoga in the present birth is well experienced for the job of divine service in the next birth. The academic degree is Jnana Yoga, which is spiritual knowledge, and the inspiration to apply it in practice is Bhakti Yoga, which is devotion. When both these are fully present, the person will enter into Karma Yoga. Hence, a person who has successfully performed Karma Yoga in the present birth will be selected for a similar job with closed eyes without considering any other details. The Gopikas were uneducated, but they had swallowed an ocean of spiritual knowledge in their previous millions of births. Is it necessary for them to study spiritual knowledge again in their birth as Gopikas? Do you need to study the subjects which were part of your academic degree again and again, each time you apply for a fresh job in a fresh organization? Do you not already have long work experience based on your academic degree which you acquired long ago? The Gopikas had already received their academic degree in their previous births when they were sages. In their births as Gopikas, they were born with full inspiration to perform Karma Yoga, to follow theoretical as well as practical devotion. They showed perfection in their practical devotion. They were able to vote for God against every strong worldly bond, like the bond with wealth, issues, and life partner. It shows that they were already full of inspiration. That inspiration is Bhakti Yoga, to practice, and that practice is Karma Yoga. They had the inspiration to practice. So the inspiration part is Bhakti Yoga, the practice part is Karma Yoga. The two perfect certificates they possessed in Jnana Yoga and Bhakti Yoga made them succeed in the examination conducted by God Krishna in Karma Yoga. So the certificate, if the Jnana Yoga and Bhakti Yoga is perfect, the Karma Yoga will also be perfect. And that examination in the life of Gopikas was about that Karma Yoga part, which is the sacrificing of the butter, which overcame the bonds with wealth and issues, and the Dareshana, which was the Rasakeli. Hence, success in Karma Yoga is the ultimate certificate for any devotee to be selected for the same job of the Karma Yoga level. So if you have successfully practiced Karma Yoga in this Janma, then that is the qualification for getting the service of God, which is again Karma Yoga in the future birth. This final certificate is sufficient to select the devotee without needing to consider any other certificates possessed by the devotee. So if the final certificate is there, which is that you are doing Karma Yoga right now, then that is the final certificate. Then other things, it automatically means that the Jnana and Bhakti must be there. Otherwise, you will not do the Karma. The next question is by Shri Rajashekhar. He asks, should I just be a part of this play of God, or should I also enjoy it as Satchidananda Rupa? His detailed question is, as there is God and the devotee, as there is Guru and the disciple, this world contains both positive and the negative. Then why does Swami ask us to focus only on the positive, which is God? Should I just be part of this play of God, or should I enjoy it being Satchidananda Rupa? Swami replied, this world is created by God for his entertainment, as said in the Veda. The entire creation is the object of the entertainment of God, who is the subject. God is the subject, creation is the object, or is the object of entertainment. The soul is a part of the object of entertainment, which is to say, the soul is part of creation. A person's property consists of movable assets such as cows, horses, sheep, etc., and immovable assets, which is land, houses, etc. Similarly, God's property, which is God's creation, consists of the non-living world, which is like the immovable assets, and the living souls, which are like the movable assets. The soul is an object of God's entertainment, and at the same time, God has granted the status of subject to the soul by making it the possessor of awareness. See, actually, the soul is only a part of creation. So it is part of the object of creation, object of entertainment. But within that object of entertainment, the soul has been given awareness. Due to that awareness, it can also become a subject. What is the subject? The person who is observing, the person, the aware person, the person with consciousness, who is observing some other soul or the creation or something like that. So the soul has been granted. This is very important. It has been granted. It is not inherently, it is all based on God's will. Because of God's will, he has granted the status of the subject to the soul. As such, the soul, by its basic nature, it is only an object of creation. It is an object of God's entertainment, since it is a part of creation. So Swamiji is explaining this by way of a nice example. A rich person produced a movie. The first show of the movie is being watched by the rich person. While watching it, he is accompanied by his employees. While seeing and enjoying the movie, the producer, which is the rich man, gives an equal status to every employee to enjoy the movie as a spectator like himself. This equality in enjoying the movie of creation along with the producer God is the only possible monism between God and the soul. Apart from the single aspect of monism, the employee is neither the producer nor the director of the movie. The soul neither created this world nor maintains this world, and nor does it destroy this world in the end. In these three aspects, God is totally different from the world, from the soul. But in the single aspect of enjoyment of the world, the servant, which is the soul, can have the equal status with the master, who is God. God wants the soul to also enjoy his creation as he enjoys it and gets real entertainment. Creation appears to be an absolute reality even to God, just as it appears absolutely real to the soul. In this single angle, the soul becomes equal to God. At the same time, the soul remains different from God in all other aspects. God and the soul are Chidananda, Chit plus Ananda. Chidananda means Chit plus Ananda, which means that both have awareness. Awareness is called Chit and bliss is called Ananda. So God and soul are Chidananda, which means that both have awareness, which is Chit, and both have bliss, which is Ananda. But God is the absolute reality known as Sat, and the soul is a relative reality known as Asat. Hence, there is similarity as well as difference between God and the soul. The difference is prominent because there is difference even in the similarity. The awareness of the soul is imaginable, whereas the awareness of God is unimaginable. See that one of the similarities that we have with God is Chit, that we are awareness. So within that awareness also, there is a difference between his awareness and our awareness. God's awareness is unimaginable. How it is generated, we don't know. We can never know. Whereas our awareness, we know quite well how that awareness was generated. It is generated through the nervous system. It is a converted form of the inert energy, and it requires that material nervous system. So it is an awareness that depends on matter and energy. So this is our awareness is of this type. His awareness is of an unimaginable type. We can never know it. So even though we say that that awareness is a common factor between God and us, God and the soul, still even within that similarity there is a difference. So similarly, the bliss attained by God through entertainment is continuous for God, whereas in the case of the soul, there is every chance of interruptions in its entertainment. So just as his awareness and our awarenesses are different, similarly, his enjoyment or entertainment and our entertainment is also different, because he is able to get continuous entertainment through the tragic scenes as well as the comic scenes, whereas we are not able to get that continuous entertainment. Only when there is a happy scene, we get entertainment. When there is a tragic scene, we are not able to enjoy it, and as a result, we face misery during that time. So our entertainment is non-continuous. There is every chance of interruptions in our entertainment, whereas God's entertainment is continuous. So in those two factors which are common between God and the soul, which is Chit and Ananda, these two factors are common between God and soul. Even within that commonality or even within that similarity, there is a difference. Going further, perfect monism between God and the soul is only possible in the case when the soul becomes a human incarnation through the perfect merging of the unimaginable God into it. The incarnation is the unimaginable God. The incarnation is the unimaginable God himself. Only in this exceptional monism does the soul become a spectator getting continuous entertainment. Only in the case of the incarnation does the soul become the subject or the creator and does not remain part of the object of entertainment. In the case of all other souls, the soul actually remains only a part of the object of entertainment. Creation is the object which God is observing as the subject. He is observing the object and he is getting entertained. So we are part of that object. So every soul is only, in the case of all other souls, those souls are only a part of that object of entertainment. Even though the soul has been granted a special status of a subject who is enjoying creation. So he has granted us that ability to observe other items since we are aware, but that getting that continuous entertainment, we cannot match God, because he is able to attain continuous entertainment which we are not able to attain. The only exceptional case where a soul can attain that is the case of the human incarnation, where there is a perfect merging between the unimaginable God and the soul. Other than that, we all cannot get that. So leaving the exceptional case of the incarnation, it is better for the soul to think that its goal is to please God, remaining as a part of the object of entertainment. Meaning, as being a part of creation, being a tiny atom within creation, our goal is to please God rather than trying to become God. It is better for the soul to neglect its granted status as a subject that is continuously entertained by creation. So God has that status where he is enjoying the whole creation. He's being entertained by the creation. So it is better that we as souls neglect that special status that is granted to us. We need not think about it that way. We can think about it in the other way, which is that we are tiny specks within creation, and our goal is to only please Him. That is the best path for any soul, so that we don't suffer from ego. And anyway, we cannot achieve it. Even if we get a lot of ego, we cannot achieve that continuous entertainment in any case. So the soul can become Satchidananda Rupa on becoming a human incarnation. See that Chit and Ananda, at least God has granted us that similarity. But in that Sat part, Sat means the ultimate truth, which is ultimate reality is only God. So that Sat part we can never get in any case. Okay, but at least the Chit and Ananda, there may be some limited commonality, limited similarity is there, but what Swamiji is suggesting, it is better we don't go for that, because it is always better we stay as a servant who is servant, a tiny speck within creation who is different from God, and our goal is to please God. So that the question started with, can we stay in that Satchidananda Rupa? So the clear answer is that we cannot stay in that Satchidananda Rupa, because we are not Sat. Only that particular soul which becomes a human incarnation, he is Satchidananda. That is true. Going further, a monistic incarnation can be treated to be a single phase alloy of gold and copper. So gold is representative of God and copper is representative of the soul. So the devoted soul is a person who is very strongly devoted to God, is like copper which is welded with gold. The incarnation is gold and copper mixed together completely. It's a single phase alloy. Okay. And the devoted soul is a copper rod which is welded to a golden rod. This is the case of the dualistic incarnation. The golden rod is God, the copper rod is the soul. Since they are welded together, they are joined together, permanently joined together, because that is a very strong devotee. So that is the dualistic incarnation. The soul is welded to God by its extreme devotion. Such a devoted soul becomes the master of God. In the case of the monastic incarnation, where God and the soul are mixed through and through, antar bahishya, that soul only becomes God, means he becomes equal to God. But in the case of the dualistic incarnation, the soul becomes the master of God. Both these incarnations should be distinguished from the point of view of the relation between God and the soul in each of the incarnations. The climax devotee, who is a dualistic incarnation, also becomes Satchidananda in an effective sense, though not in a direct sense. In the dualistic incarnation, the devoted soul is indirectly God, and hence the devoted soul can also get the status of Satchidananda indirectly. Not in a direct way, not exactly, but in an indirect way, because whatever the devotee wishes, that also happens because God makes it happen. Not that the devotee can make it happen, because God makes it happen, it happens. The positive merit and the negative sin are equal in the sense that both are relatively real in the view of the absolutely real God. But both the positive and the negative are equally real with respect to the relatively real soul. Hence, there is a real difference between these two relatively real positive and negative items for the relatively real soul. See, we are part of the. So any item within the relatively real creation is absolutely real to us. God is the absolute reality. Compared to Him, the creation is a lower level of reality. It is a relative reality. For Him, He can say that there is no positive, no negative. But from our point of view, since we are within creation, every item within creation is equally real as ourselves. And so the positives and the negatives are actually and absolutely real for the soul. So God can be entertained equally by positives and negatives, but the relatively real soul feels happiness only upon receiving the fruit of merit, and the soul feels misery upon receiving the fruit of sin. So that completes this discourse. Now, if perhaps if Bharat is ready, we can try to play the video.
Yes, sir. I am ready, sir. Shall I start?
Yes, please.
బాగా చెప్పారు దత్తస్వామి గారు.
Can you see the screen,
దత్తస్వామి
sir?
గారు అంటే దత్తుడు బాగా చెప్పాడు అని నేను చెప్తున్నది.
Yes, can see it.
ఐక్యూ బాగా పెరిగింది.
Do both ignorance and knowledge lead to darkness? January 29th, 2021. Shri Balaji asks.
వెనకటి పండితుల కన్నా కూడా.
Can you hear me, sir?
Explain the concepts of avidya and vidya and asambhuti and sambhuti, which occur in the Ishavasya Upanishad. Following are some excerpts from the Upanishad. Andham tamah pravishanti.
బ్రేక్ అవుతున్నది.
It is not clear actually. We can't see anything.
Bharat.
Yes, sir. This is actually stuck. I mean, it's loading.
Then maybe we can leave it. We'll have it next time.
Yes.
Okay, sir. Then
so let
so
me.
much of disturbance is coming.
Yes. Bharat, you can unshare the screen.
Yes.
I think Dr. Nikhil can continue with the knowledge.
Yes, Swamiji. I am reading, Swamiji.
This can be postponed to another week.
Yes, sir. Yes, Swamiji. Bharat, you can unshare the screen.
Yes, sir. I'm trying that. Actually, it's got stuck. The system got stuck.
Okay. Okay. So the next discourse is has a question by Srimati Sudharani, and the question is, what does Sharanagati or surrender mean? So detailed question is, Pada Namaskaram Swami, the one who is on the path of developing true devotion must serve God without any aspiration, Nishkama Buddhi. Such a person should not expect any worldly benefits or benefits in this world or benefits in the upper world during the future births. With this understanding, I have the following questions. Is it correct to believe that whatever happy and sad experiences I am getting in my life are according to Swami's wish? Does Sharanagati mean leaving all the decisions related to my life to Swami? Can I consider my dependence on Swami during any critical situation, thinking that Swami is the real caretaker, as Nishkama Buddhi? Is it correct to think that the expectation of care from Swami itself is devotion or bhakti? Please clear my confusions and help me understand the correct knowledge, Swami. Swami replied, the climax of love for God is the real essence of Sharanagati. Sharanagati also means the surrender of the devotee to God in times of difficulties or to fulfill his or her worldly desires. The second type of Sharanagati is done by every devotee, since the devotee requires a favor from God. But this is not real Sharanagati. When we are in need of some help from an officer, we show all respect and obedience towards him. That is only apparent Sharanagati. When the devotee's devotion towards God is at its climax, Sharanagati is not expressed in any way. Yet God knows everything about that devotee who is in the climax stage of devotion, and he renders the necessary help. God does for the devotee what is good in his eyes, and not what is good in the eyes of the devotee. The devotee does not bother about the help from God, since the devotee's love for God is at its climax. The devotee does not aspire for any fruit in return from God. Parents love their issues whether they serve them or not in return. That is true love. Such should be the devotee's love for God. Externally expressed Sharanagati always indicates unreal love and the aspiration for some fruit in return. In love, there is no need of expressing Sharanagati, because the climax of love itself is the real Sharanagati. Kumari Lakshmi Trailokya asked, what is the difference between love and lust for God? Her exact question is, what is the difference between having prema, which is love, and having moha for God? I believe that lust is different from the above two words. Swami replied, love is called prema and lust is called moha. The word love is used in the context of worldly bonds, whereas devotion is the word used in the context of the bond with God. As such, there is not the slightest difference between love and devotion. Both are one and the same in all respects. Worldly bonds are different, like the bonds with parents, brother, sister, son, daughter, husband, wife, darling, friend, etc. All these worldly bonds can also be extended to God. Thus, one can love God considering him to be any of the above relatives as per one's liking. The bond with one's darling is called sweet devotion or Madhura Bhakti. The Gopikas and more recently Meera chose to have this bond with God. As per the ethics of worldly life, which is pravrutti, this bond is illegitimate. But through this very Madhura Bhakti, the Gopikas reached the highest specially created world called Goloka. This apparent contradiction is explained in the Bhagavatam. The married Gopikas loved God Krishna as their lover. This might appear to be illegitimate love based on worldly ethics or pravrutti. But the deeper truth was that Krishna, who was God in human form, was testing whether the Gopikas' love for Krishna exceeded their love for their legitimate married life partners. The Gopikas were sages in millions of their previous births, and they had prayed to attain the climax of devotion for God, exceeding any other worldly bond. Devotion to God must be total, like a single lump, without even a trace of it diverted towards any worldly bond. Eka bhaktir vishishyate, which is told in the Gita. There is nothing and no soul that is even equal to God, let alone anything or anybody being greater than God. Natat samascha bhyadikascha shruyate, parasya shaktihi, and so on. It is told in the Veda. The test conducted by Krishna for the Gopikas was the most delicate test of God. A soul has three strong worldly bonds, which are the bonds with money, the bonds with the bond with one's issues, and the one with one's life partners. The bond with one's life partner is one of these three strong worldly bonds. Krishna tested the Gopikas to ensure that their love for God exceeded all these three worldly bonds. The direct approach of Krishna in testing devotees is very difficult to understand correctly. Hence, Krishna's actions were misunderstood by several people in the time of Krishna. Even now, his actions are misunderstood, especially by the followers of other religions who like to point fingers at Hinduism. Due to this difficulty in understanding Krishna's actions, it is said that a scholar in spiritual knowledge is to be tested in his ability to understand the Bhagavatam. Vidyavatam Bhagavate Pariksha. Meera suffered a lot since she considered Krishna to be her lover. She was even given poison by her husband. God Krishna should not be misunderstood, because after testing the Gopikas, he never returned to the Gopikas, nor did he repeat that kind of test anywhere else in his life. Based on these points, it should be properly understood that those incidents were the tests of God in which the Gopikas had to prove that their bond with God was stronger than any of their strong worldly bonds. Only upon passing that test could it be declared that their bond with God was really the strongest bond. The truth is always harsh, but the truth alone always remains the truth. The next question is by Shri Bharat Krishna. How can we pass on the credit of our good actions to God? While we were discussing in our satsang group, I said the following statement. If I am doing anything good, it is due to Swami's grace. After saying that, one of the elder devotees in the group said that there is an even better way to pass on the credit to God, which is to say as follows. Whatever good is happening is due to Swami's grace, and if there are any defects in the work, they are due to me. Kindly explain a little more about this to me. Kind, Kindly explain a little more about this to me, Swami. Swami replied, both the statements seem to be one and the same, except in the way the words are arranged. Saying that any merit is due to God's grace or passing on the credit of the merit to God is one and the same in both. The next question is by Srimati Anita Renkuntlaji. Does a wife who cooks food for a sacrifice or a yajna get an equal share of the fruit of the sacrifice as her husband? The detailed question is that if the wife does not earn anything, but she offers her service, which is karma sannyasa, by cooking food for feeding the hungry in a ritual sacrifice, which is yajna, does she get an equal share of the fruit of the sacrifice, which is karma phala tyaga, as her husband? Swami replied, karma sannyasa and karma phala tyaga together constitute karma yoga. A non-earning member of the family can only do the sacrifice of work, which is offering his or her own service. The person cannot sacrifice the fruit of work, which is wealth. Such a non-earning member is equal to a saint in this aspect, because the saint also doesn't earn any money, and so he cannot do karma phala tyaga. But if an earning member only does karma sannyasa and avoids karma phala tyaga, I will repeat, there is some disturbance in the audio. Okay. But if an earning member only does karma sannyasa and avoids karma phala tyaga, the person is greedy. The earning member has money, he can do karma phala tyaga, but he is avoiding that. Then he is definitely greedy. Such a member will not get the divine fruit. But in the case mentioned by you, the wife is eligible to the divine fruit just as her husband is eligible. Practical devotion is called karma yoga. It is not merely karma phala tyaga. When karma phala tyaga is mentioned, it also includes karma sannyasa. In that sense, karma phala tyaga can stand for karma yoga as a whole. A person who is able to do karma phala tyaga should also do karma sannyasa unless the person is very old or diseased, etc. When a person, like a saint or a non-earning wife, does karma sannyasa alone, the person has done karma yoga. But if a person does not sacrifice, even when it is possible for the person to sacrifice, the person is at fault. The next question is by Shri Anil. It is a question raised by some other person on the internet. The question is, was Jesus with God or was Jesus God himself? The detailed question is, in the Bible, John 1.1 and 2, it is stressed that the word, which is Jesus is said to be the word, logos. Logos is in Latin or Greek, I'm not sure. It means the word, and that word actually represents Jesus. So it is stressed that the word was with God. And this is in one statement. Does this not show that Jesus was with God and that he is not God himself? So this is the question of that other person. Swami replied, the word Jesus means the medium with which God merged perfectly. Due to the perfect merging of God with the medium, You can say that Jesus is God, and you can equally say that Jesus is with God. So the Dvaita, Advaita, Vishishta Advaita, all three can be correlated in the context of the human incarnation. If you from one view you can say that there's perfect merging, so he is identical with God. The opposite end, which is Dvaita, you can say that he is different from God because the medium is the medium and God is unimaginable. The medium is imaginable in that sense, and in the middle path you can also take a Vishishta Advaita. The next question, again by some other person who has asked the question through Anilji. If Jesus was God himself, why did he pray to God to forgive his killers? So the detailed question is, if the Holy Trinity were true and if Jesus were God, why did Jesus say, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do, upon being crucified? Should he not have said, I forgive you, for you know not what you do? So in that case, is Jesus really God? So Swami replied, the incarnation behaves as God himself, or as the Son of God, or as the messenger of God, as per the level of the people receiving his knowledge. Those who crucified Jesus belonged only to the third level, and hence Jesus prayed to God to forgive those cruel people. Had Jesus said that he is forgiving them, they would only laugh at him because of their low level, uh, because of the low level of their spiritual understanding. Now, a person again through Anilji, he is asking, will Krishna save me from Allah's wrath if I worship any other god, uh, any god other than Allah? The detailed question is, Allah says that creation is apart from Allah, meaning separate from Allah, and Allah gets angry if anything conceivable or anything imaginable within creation, if anything imaginable is worshipped, then Allah gets angry. Whereas Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita does not talk of any such restriction. So would Krishna be able to save me from Allah's wrath or Allah's anger if I listened to Krishna? Swami replied, both Allah and Krishna are one and the same God. Both these human incarnations of the same God conveyed the same truth. They only expressed it in different ways as per the digestion capacity of the receivers of their spiritual knowledge in their respective time. The basic truth is one and the same. The method of conveying the truth alone differs. Next question, again brought by Anil ji, belonging to somebody else. How can the death of Jesus cancel the sins of others? So this person is asking, how did Jesus's death take away your sin? If you kill somebody, me dying for you does not mean that you are forgiven. So if Jesus died over there, how can the sins of other people be cancelled? That is the question. Swami replied, you should not take the literal meaning everywhere. If a sinner is given the confidence that his past sins are cancelled due to the suffering of Jesus, the sinner might get reformed. He might not commit any sin in the future. Once he is fully reformed, as proven by his non-doing of sins throughout his life, the sins committed by him in the past get cancelled. This is because the punishment for the sin is only meant for reformation. Once the reformation is complete, there is no further purpose of the punishment. Thus, the person's sins get indirectly cancelled upon knowing that Jesus suffered and died for his sins. One way or the other, the final result is the same, which is that the person's sins get cancelled. The final result is important and not how the result was attained. Another question by a devotee brought by Anilji. If there is one God, then why are there so many religions? Swami replied, there are many religions on this earth, each of them associated with different cultures and languages, and each of them suitable to people with different levels of maturity. Diversity already exists among people. Hence, God has to descend in the form of different human incarnations to suit these different people belonging to different cultures and regions. The same subject of spiritual knowledge has been preached by God in different languages, following different cultures and using different ways of preaching to become the different religions of the world. The next question, again brought by Anil ji. Is there any evidence of a reputed scientist believing in God? Swami replied, Einstein and Newton are reputed scientists, and both were strong believers in God. Even now, there are several top scientists who perfectly believe in God. The next question. Why did Christ forgive a woman who had committed adultery but not men? The detailed question is, how could Christ forgive the woman who had committed adultery but not forgive the men who did the same? Uh, is it not worse to forgive only the woman if God has made women less sexual than men? Swami replied, the woman who had committed the sin surrendered to God. Hence, God excused her, asking her to never repeat the sin. The non-repetition of the sin is the most important step. The sinful men did not realize this, and they did not surrender to God. When even the first step of realization was absent in them, where is the possibility of excusing them? The surrendered woman promised that she would not repeat the sin. This is the difference between those men and that woman in the above case. There is no question of gender of the soul in the view of God. The next question. Should all religions not modify their ancient holy books to suit present times? Swami replied, the scriptures of religions written in ancient times only need to be interpreted in a manner suitable for present times. The basic subject remains one and the same in all times. The method of presentation alone changes from time to time. The next question is, do the Vedas say that killing a snake is a sin? Swami replied, a snake is also a soft-natured soul. It always tries to escape from us, fearing that we might kill it. It bites us only for its self-protection when it feels that we might kill it. If you quietly, if you quietly go your own way, the snake will also quietly go its own way. Killing any soft-natured animal or bird is a sin. A tiger or lion kills us for eating us as its prey. The snake only bites in self-defense and not to drink our blood. So you should not count snakes in the list of ferocious animals and birds. Any concept supported by logic is the sacred spiritual knowledge, which itself is called the Veda. Even a Vedic quotation should not be accepted if it goes against correct logic. Such a statement should be treated to be an insertion into the scripture by some wicked people. The next question is God sadistic for sending his son to die to forgive mankind's sins and teach them love? Swami replied, the term Son of God is only one of the interpretations or views of the human incarnation. This view is suitable to the middle level devotees. Actually, God himself came in the name and form of Jesus to undergo crucifixion so that his program of melting the rocky hearts of cruel devotees could be accomplished. The next question is by Shri Ganesh. How can I rise from being the worst devotee to the best devotee? His detailed question is, Dear Swami, I recently had a dream about you. In that dream, we were having a conversation about something that I cannot recollect. But at the end of the conversation, I called myself an average devotee, to which you replied, no, you are the worst devotee. I woke up the next day and I did not know what I must make out of this dream. After some time, I felt happy that at least you called me a devotee. But I must ask you how I should improve to become the best devotee. At your divine feet, Ganesh. Swami replied, the worst does not mean condemned. It only means the ground level from which every devotee climbs up to higher levels. Every top devotee was the worst, someday or the other in the past. Sometimes the worst becomes the best and the best becomes the worst. This is like the first becoming the last and the last becoming the first. The next question, which is the last question in this series, is by Kumari Trailokya. She is asking, should I take drugs or alcohol offered to me thinking it to be God's will? Her detailed question is, Pada Namaskaram Swami, Lord Jesus submitted to the will of God at the time of his crucifixion. You have said that we should submit to the will of God by accepting both rewards and punishments in life without any resistance. Suppose someone offers me drugs or alcohol. Why should I not take it thinking that it must be the will of God? Why should I not think that God wants me to taste everything in life? Kindly enlighten me. At your divine lotus feet, Trailokya. Swami replied, God has clearly instructed what is good and what is bad in the ethical scriptures. There is no question of assuming the bad to be the will of God. The clear mention in the scriptures is more authoritative than your assumptions about God. So that completes the this set of questions for now. Swamiji, can we open up for questions now?
Yes, correct.
So if anybody has any questions to ask Swamiji, you may please state them now. I think Veena Datta and Nava Chaitanya might have noted down some of the questions that we discussed in the week, right? Veena Datta?
Question. I'm Durgapta Swami. I have a small question. Hello.
Yes, sir. Please speak.
Actually, you told the Lord never breaks the rules. Whatever rules he has framed, he doesn't break them. But in rare occasions, he broke the rules. Like in the case of killing Vali, Rama broke the rules and killed him from the back. And for that, in the next birth, he took the arrow in a similar way. But whereas in the Avatar, Krishna Avatara, he encouraged Pandavas to kill Duryodhana and Karna by breaking the rules. How to justify this, Swami, from his actions in this case? This is my question, Swami.
Yes.
That's all, Swami.
Okay.
Veena Datta, you have the questions, right?
Uncle, I think now Chaitanya will be reading those questions.
Okay. Chaitanya?
But only it seems that Padmaram Garu's questions have been already answered.
Oh,
So I think she asked not to put those questions again.
okay.
Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Bharat.
Sir, I will read out the questions.
Yes.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yes. Go ahead.
Yes.
So these questions are asked by Anita Renkuntla Garu. The questions are, she asked two questions. The first question is, Pada Namaskaram Swami. Swami, there are many ambidextrous students in a school in MP. She saw that on TV show, who writes with their both hands at a time. They do two homeworks at the same time. That is writing Hindi with right hand, doing math with left hand, and so on. Is it a God's gift to do multitasking by them? And second question is, in Kali Yuga, people have no time to read or hear the knowledge given by human incarnation, or they have no interest in spiritual knowledge. How can the inherent qualities of the soul be changed? I read in the discourse that even after the destruction of the creation, the souls exist in a hidden state. They will born again with the same inherent qualities in the new creation of God. Then how is the reformation of the soul possible? Do forgive me if I have misunderstood the concept. At your divine feet, Anita Renkuntla. The second question, Swami. This question is from Suganya Raman Garu. The question is as follows. Yesterday, I heard to King Karosmi Tava Shankara song and came across the line about Upamanyu. It was indeed a nice read about Upamanyu Maharshi, who as a child was fed milk by Lord Shiva and was blessed and lived long, and later part Lord Krishna learnt about making penance from Upamanyu Maharshi. I read as Lord Sri Krishna wanted to do penance to Lord Shiva to get children. So he was searching for a guru. Upamanyu became Sri Krishna's guru. My question is, why would Sri Krishna, a Sadguru himself, need a guru? Also came across what Upamanyu's mother told him. Anything with which we are blessed in this life is only a product of which we have sacrificed to Lord Shiva in our previous life, Purva Janma. Just curious to know if sacrificing money can make us wealthy. What sacrifice can make one get jnana or spiritual education or be close with God in every birth? Finally, a beautiful line from the Red. The story of Upamanya tells a very good lesson for us. Even if a person starts worshipping God for the worldly desires, if he could give priority to God, he can attain high spiritual states. Everything is in giving priority. These are the questions and comments made by Suganya Raman Garu Swami. She asked you to send them to you. If any further questions, if anyone wants to ask, they can ask now. 2 more minutes left. Within 2 minutes, if you can ask, you can ask. Swami, I think no questions are there. Shall we go to Mahima Yamuna?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Swami, namaskaram, Swami.
Yes. Namaste.
Namaskaram. One.
Namaste.
Next in the series of Vishnu Lahari, curing Sitamma Garu from long time headache. Sitamma visited the house of Sri CVK Murthy to see Swami for the first time.